So just a quick video to show you how I structured my weirdest case interview ever at Bain. If you're in this video, it's probably from the email I sent you. But in case you haven't read the whole email, I'm just gonna briefly show you what the case was like. So I walked into the interview's room. He was kind of a weird guy in a sense, a little awkward, I would say. And he drew this to me. And he basically said, hey, this is the coast of a Latin American country, and this country does offshore oil production. So they have oil rigs on the deep sea to extract oil. And the way the supply chain works is that you have some small tankers, small oil ships that get oil from the oil rigs. Then they go to port and store this oil in storage tanks. Now, eventually, you have large tankers, so very large oil ships that get this oil from the storage tanks and take it to export, usually to Europe. And the case question was, why do these storage tanks exist? And it's a weird question, right? The question wasn't, should we build more storage tanks, or, what would you do if you were the owner of these storage tanks to increase sales or increase profits? The question was, why do these exist? Almost an existential question, right? Now, I've asked you guys in my email list to send me some structures of how you would structure this. And there were basically two types of structures that you guys sent me. The first one was something like costs, and then you had something like, the ship's costs, and then, oil rig. And they tried to describe the cost of this whole operation, but there wasn't much rationale on what do you do with this? And how do you know that the reason is costs? You don't know that yet, do you? So this type of structure, not gonna make it. Now, another type of structure was bucket frameworks, right? So a lot of people sent me this, and it was something like, I need to understand the oil rig, and I need to understand the small ships. I need to understand the storage, large ships too. So you had these categories. Some people put the companies here. Some people put demand or customers. So you had a bunch of boxes and many questions within them, a ton of questions, right? And this is fine. I mean, if you ask all of these questions, 6 buckets and who knows how many issues or hypotheses or questions to ask about each part of this thing, you're probably gonna have at some point some understanding of what might be going on. So you may take maybe 20 minutes to ask all of these questions, try to create a hypothesis, and then maybe, but just maybe, figure out a solution. You can solve this case with a structure like this. However, it's gonna take a long time, and you're gonna be at a lot of risk because you might not get to the answer. So this type of structure, some people call them bucket frameworks. I call them context-driven frameworks. They're great when you need to gather a lot of context about a situation to get to a sound answer, a sound recommendation. But they're not very good for getting to the right answer. And there is a reason why these storage tanks exist. So this isn't a strategy case. You're not trying to, infer things about the future, trying to understand how a market works so that you can create a strategy that is more likely to work, but there is no right answer because we're talking about the future. There is a right answer to this case. There is a reason why these storage tanks exist. However, you can't just use math to get to the right answer because you don't even know if the answer is math, right? It could be costs, but it could be many other things. So what's the structure that I used in this interview and that I think was perhaps the most efficient and perhaps the most effective way to structure this? If you read my email, you know already that there are 5 roles a structure may take. A structure can find the key piece of math that will solve the case. That's for more analytical cases, should we expand capacity or should we substitute labor to machinery to do some sort of job? A structure may be used to gather context, which could work here, but risky, not time efficient. A structure may take a role to find a root cause to a problem. Now, there isn't any problem here, so not the best one. A structure may be used to find the criteria and evaluate criteria for different things. And we're getting closer, I guess. And a structure may be used to find options. So what are the options we have? And then you can eliminate the bad options and evaluate the good ones. And this is the approach that I took with this case. What I figured out was, well, this supply chain is one option among other supply chain options. So what are the alternatives and what could be wrong with them? Because people in this industry, they chose to build storage tanks. And you know, it's hard for a whole industry to be wrong. I mean, it happens sometimes, but we have to assume that they know how their business works and you know what's the best way to set things up. So what are the alternatives that did not work? One alternative is small tankers straight to Europe. So that's alternative, let's say A. So small tankers get oil from the oil rigs and go straight to Europe. That's one alternative, right? It could work. Another alternative is these large tankers could fuel up straight from the oil rig and then go to Europe without having to go to land. So let's draw it like this, right? Obviously, they wouldn't come all the way here. They just go this way, right? Now, there is a third alternative, which is small tankers get oil from the oil rig, and then they go straight to the large tankers to fill them up. So I don't know if this is like feasible from an engineering perspective, but you could imagine that they put like these tubes and pipes at sea and transfer oil from the small tankers to the large tankers. I'm not saying this is a good idea, but these alternatives are MECE along with what currently happens, right? The oil rigs can't move, Europe can't move either. So these are the alternatives that we have. So the structure I created was like this. I told my interviewer, hey, if this process happens as it happens, it's probably the best of all options. And I see three other options. Option number one, the small tankers could go to Europe. Option number two, the large tankers could fill up at the oil rigs. And option number three, the small tankers could fill up at the oil rig and then transfer the oil directly to the large tankers. If these three options are bad or unfeasible or, you know, they're worse, then this logically tells us that we should have storage tanks. And then I said, well, but what makes these choices bad? It could be a bunch of things, but I can think of three main ones. One is cost. I'm sure that they prefer the less costly option. So let me write down here, criteria for evaluating these options. I'm sure they look at cost, and it's not just the cost to one company, it's the cost for the whole supply chain, right? So this is one thing. Another one is feasibility. So for example, maybe this last option just isn't feasible. It seems to be less costly, right? Because you don't have to stop at the port and build the storage tanks, you know, wait a few days for the large tankers to come. So it could be less costly, but it might not be feasible. It could be impossible to do this with current technology, at least. And the third criteria is safety. So environmental safety or the safety of the personnel who work at this operation. So if this whole industry have the storage tanks, it's because these three other options are not safe enough, not feasible, or more costly. So basically, to figure out why these storage tanks exist, we need to figure out which of these three do these options fall into, and then we'll know why these storage tanks exist. So this was my structure. Pretty simple, right? And it was how I was able to finish this case in about 15 minutes, according to the interviewer, much faster than the other candidates were able to. So I had my options here, and these are hypothetical options as an industry, right? Because the storage tanks already exist. And I had my criteria here. So it's a structure with two roles and actually two parts, right? I have 4 options and 3 criteria to evaluate each of these options. Now, obviously, the interview had some other elements beyond these, right? This was the initial structuring. The next step of the interview was the interviewer asking me how would I test these hypotheses. And basically what I had to do was to cross-examine each criteria with each of the 3 options that aren't the ones being used, right? So is it feasible for small tankers to go to Europe? Perhaps they they're too small, they can't sail the Atlantic. And then the interviewer would be like, oh, it's feasible. Okay, so this is not the reason. Is it safe for them to sail to Europe? And the interviewer was like, well, yeah, it's pretty safe. They're actually quite big ships. They're just not as big as the large ships. Okay, so for this one, it must be cost. So I'm going to write down here cost. Then I asked, well, is it feasible for small tankers to transfer oil to large tankers? And he said, well, it's a technology that could be developed, but no one has developed that. And I was like, okay, is it safe? And he was like, no, it's not safe. So, okay. So the answer here is because of safety. And I proceeded doing this cross-examination, and eventually I got to the answer, right? And there was a third question, which was basically the answer here was, I think it was cost as well, or feasibility. I don't remember. But the case ended zooming in to this. Why is it more costly for small tankers to go to Europe than large tankers? And we had a whole thing about brainstorming economies of scale of ships of different sizes, right? So intuitively, we know that for long trips, a large ship will be more economical, less costly per liter or gallon or barrel of oil than a small ship. But what are the drivers of this cost difference? And this was also a tough question. It's the type of brainstorming question that you don't see all the time. And it's because of cases like this, like weird cases that regular frameworks won't do the job. It's because of brainstorming questions like this that I've spent the best part of 2025. I spent the last 6 months building a new course to teach you these structuring skills. Now, we had a structuring course in the past called Structuring Drills. We're taking that out of the market. And it was a great course. People loved it. But it was just structuring exercises. It was just structuring drills. It was just practice. This new course is going to be 5 to 10 times better than structuring drills because we're teaching new systems, we're teaching new techniques to have structures that will help you solve your cases faster and to go beyond issue trees and bucket frameworks because sometimes they're not the best tool for the job. So the core system of the course is the 4 types of cases. Basically, there are 4 types of cases, and I'm not talking about market entry, product launch, because these types of cases that people say, they're not MECE, right? You can have a public sector case that's about electricity deregulation. We actually have a case like this in this new course. You could have a white labeling case. A supermarket wants to white label a new brand of products. Like, how do you think about this type of problem? You can't have a framework for that. You have to create your own. And this new course is all about creating frameworks from scratch, which is why it's called Structure from Scratch. So we'll show you what the 4 types of cases there are. And these are 4 underlying logics or different logics that a case may have. So you can have a market entry case that's on the first type of case, analytical decisions, or it could be a market entry case that's on the second type of case, or third type of case, or the 4th type of case. And even though they are market entry cases, all 4 of them, the way you structure them is completely different. We'll also teach you new tools, new techniques in this course. So we'll show you the 5 ways to be MECE, issue trees, bucket frameworks, the techniques you know already, but we'll also teach you new, more advanced techniques like the interweaving technique, which is a technique to make your bucket framework sharper, more effective, so you can solve your cases about twice as fast. We'll teach you objective-driven structures, which are structures that are used to solve strategy cases or strategic decision cases that go beyond what most candidates can do. They're super sharp to the point. If you're able to create them, and they are harder to create, we'll show you how in the course, and you're gonna get enough practice for that. But if you're able to create them, you're probably gonna solve your cases in about half the time other candidates do. We'll also teach you option trees, which are another technique. We'll teach you 2 advanced brainstorming techniques, and you'll have plenty of practice. There's more than 50 framework drills in the course. You also get plenty of brainstorming and hypothesis testing drills. And perhaps most importantly, we'll show you how to brainstorm things that actually happen in case interviews, but you don't see in casebooks, like brainstorming for economies of scale or how to brainstorm switching costs, barriers to entry. I know I'm biased, but it's gonna be the ultimate course to improve your structuring skills for your case interviews, but realistically, for your whole career. Because I learned structuring, I don't know, about 12 years ago when I was preparing for my cases, and I use this skill every day since then. Doesn't matter what type of job you do, doesn't matter what type of career you have in the future, you're gonna use these skills forever. But perhaps most importantly, you're watching this, you wanna do well in your cases, get your MBB job. So it's gonna be the ultimate resource to learn the most important case interview skills. If you liked our free course, if you've liked any of our courses, if you've learned issue trees with us, the 5 ways to be MECE, the landscape technique, these structuring techniques, you're gonna love this course because we'll go much, much, much deeper into structuring, but not in a way that makes your structures be super complex, right? They'll actually be quite simple, easy to build, fast to build. I know this is important to many of you guys, and they'll help you solve your cases and your projects when you become a consultant way faster, more effectively, more clearly. So watch your inbox tomorrow, and I hope to see you in the course.